In America and the UK, people don't scare easily, but there's something uniquely chilling about a man standing alone at a grave, whispering apologies to the woman he believes he failed, unaware that the very woman he's mourning is hiding behind the trees, breathing, watching, trembling, and terrified to reveal the truth. If this kind of emotional, twist-filled drama hits you right in the chest, make sure you follow, subscribe, and don't miss the next chapters, because this story only gets darker, deeper, and more shocking from here. Ethan Clark had visited the cemetery every Sunday for the last 4 years, always at the same hour, always holding the same bouquet of pale white lilies because they had been her favorite, and every week he would kneel in front of the grave engraved with Marissa Clark, beloved mother and wife, tracing her name with trembling fingers as if he could somehow feel her warmth through the cold stone, while his son Liam waited quietly beside him, leaning his small head against his father's shoulder. But on this particular Sunday, what Ethan didn't know, what he couldn't even fathom, was that a woman stood behind a thick sycamore tree not far from the grave, gripping her coat so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, her breath catching in her throat as she watched the man she once married cry for her, unaware that she was very much alive, heart beating, chest heaving, and wishing she could reach out but terrified that doing so would destroy everything she had sacrificed herself to protect. Ethan's voice cracked as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Riss, I should have been there, I should have protected you." And the woman behind the tree, Marissa Clark, alive after 4 years of being declared dead, bit down on her trembling lips so hard she tasted blood, because she remembered the night she disappeared, the night she realized that if she stayed with her husband and son, the people hunting her would find them too, and she had chosen to fake her death, stage a car crash, leave her wedding ring in the snow, and vanish into the shadows under the protection of a federal witness program that eventually went wrong, forcing her into a life of hiding and silence. Ethan pulled Liam closer and tried to smile through the pain, telling his son that mommy had loved him more than anything, and Marissa felt her legs weaken at the sound of her little boy's voice. He had grown taller, his speech clearer, his curls longer, and the memory of leaving him tore at her insides like claws. 4 years earlier she had been a bright-eyed investigative journalist, chasing a corruption case inside a pharmaceutical company that was smuggling untested drugs into hospitals, drugs that killed innocent patients, and when she uncovered the conspiracy, she became their #1 threat, receiving warnings, then threats, then a brutal attempt on her life that left her convinced that the only way to keep Ethan and little Liam alive was to disappear completely. Ethan blamed himself every day, thinking he should have insisted on driving her that night, thinking if he had gone with her she wouldn't have skidded off the cliff, a staged scene the enemy orchestrated so well that even investigators confirmed the death, leaving him with nothing but nightmares and guilt. And as he knelt there on this cold morning, Marissa took a step closer instinctively, her breath shaking, but quickly retreated behind the tree when she saw another figure walking toward the grave. A woman Ethan now knew, a woman he had never wanted but who kept appearing around him offering help, Rebecca Hayes, the supportive coworker, who had comforted Ethan after Marissa's supposed death, and Marissa's stomach tightened because she recognized Rebecca not as a friend, but as someone who had been part of the pharmaceutical cover-up years ago. Ethan didn't know that Rebecca had once worked quietly behind the scenes for the same criminals who had hunted Marissa, nor did he know that Rebecca's sudden interest in him after his wife's death had nothing to do with empathy and everything to do with surveillance, making sure Marissa never resurfaced. Ethan stood and forced a polite smile as Rebecca approached, while Marissa stared from the distance, fighting the instinct to rush out and warn him, but she couldn't, not yet, because the danger wasn't gone, and the people who wanted her dead still didn't know she had survived their attempt 4 years earlier. Rebecca placed her hand on Ethan's arm sympathetically, a gesture Marissa had seen years ago and despised because of the falseness behind it, and Marissa's heart kicked harder as she watched Ethan step away from Rebecca as if uncomfortable, something Marissa hadn't expected but felt a flicker of hope from. Yet she also noted Rebecca's expression change, a split second of irritation, almost anger, before softening again into her practiced kind smile. Liam tugged his father's sleeve and said he was cold, and Marissa instinctively reached out toward him with a hand he couldn't see, wiping her eyes because she remembered the nights she would wrap him in a blanket and kiss the top of his head until he fell asleep. Ethan took Liam to the car, lifting him gently into his booster seat, and Marissa stepped from behind the tree only enough to see their faces in the weak winter sunlight, whispering to herself, "I'm here, baby, I never wanted to leave you, I never." But she stopped when she heard another sound, the soft crunch of leaves beneath careful footsteps approaching her from behind. She spun around, panic shooting up her spine, half expecting a hired killer or a federal agent who had discovered she'd broken protocol by coming here, but instead found a hooded figure leaning against a gravestone, a man with a scar across his cheek who smirked at her with chilling familiarity, whispering, "You shouldn't be here, Marissa." There watching, and her heart cratered because she recognized him instantly. Kyle Mercer, a former federal handler who had originally been assigned to protect her but who had something darker tied to her disappearance, someone she once trusted but who had betrayed her at the last second, delivering her location to the very criminals she had been running from. Marissa's chest tightened as she took a step back, whispering, "Why are you here? How did you find me?" But Kyle only smirked and said, "You think you're the only one who visits your own grave. They're not convinced you're dead. And if they catch a whiff of you..." He let the unfinished threat hang in the air like smoke. Marissa clenched her fists, refusing to let fear control her, and demanded, "Is Ethan in danger?" But Kyle only tilted his head, gave a half shrug, and walked away slowly, leaving her with a cold dread twisting in her stomach. She wanted to run to Ethan's car and scream for him to drive far away, but she knew that would only expose everything and bring danger straight to him and Liam, so instead she watched their car pull out of the cemetery and disappear down the road, her eyes stinging with tears as she realized that this brief glimpse of her family, this stolen moment of watching the man she loved still love her, might be the last safe moment she would ever have. Across town, Ethan drove silently, gripping the steering wheel with the same familiar guilt, unaware that a dark SUV was following far behind him, its tinted windows hiding the people inside, people who had once celebrated Marissa's supposed death, people who now questioned whether she might still be alive, and as they trailed Ethan's car, one of them muttered coldly, "If she's alive, she'll come back for the boy," words that would echo into the terrifying chain of events soon to unfold. Ethan parked in front of his small house on Hawthorne Lane, helping Liam out of the car, unaware of the watchful eyes hidden far across the street or of the woman he still loved standing at her own grave whispering promises she wasn't sure she'd live long enough to keep. And as Marissa finally walked away from the cemetery with her hood pulled tight, she made a silent vow that she would not allow the monsters chasing her to touch Ethan or Liam ever again, even if it meant coming out of hiding, even if it meant exposing herself to danger, even if it meant facing death a second time. Ethan didn't know why the entire drive home felt heavier than usual, as though something unseen was pressing against the back of his mind, whispering danger, urging caution, even though he brushed it off as just another flare of grief. But when he placed Liam on the living room couch and went to the kitchen to warm some milk, he caught a flicker of motion through the window, something dark, something fast, a vehicle pausing just a little too long at the curb before rolling away, and he tried to ignore the uneasy twist in his gut. Meanwhile, miles away, Marissa walked quickly along a side road, her hood pulled low, her breath fogging the cold air as she replayed Kyle Mercer's warning in her mind. Each step weighted with the realization that someone had been following Ethan, someone she still hadn't identified, and the knowledge clawed at her because she understood exactly what it meant. The people who hunted her before were circling again, and if they suspected she was alive, they would come for her family first. She ducked into the back entrance of a nearly deserted bus station, pulling from her pocket the cheap prepaid phone she used to contact only one person, Agent Vera Castillo, the one federal officer who had believed Marissa's original claims of corporate murder and who had fought to keep her alive when the rest of the department abandoned her case. But when Marissa dialed her number, all she heard was, "The number you are calling is no longer in service," and the sudden, icy silence felt like a punch to the chest, leaving her with only one conclusion. Either Vera had been pulled off the case or something had happened to her. Something deliberate, something violent. Back at home, Ethan tried to focus on Liam, reading him a story, tucking him in, but his head kept snapping toward the front window, expecting a shape to appear in the darkness, and he told himself he was being paranoid, but something felt different tonight, more electric, more charged, as though the world was shifting underneath him. After leaving the cemetery, the black SUV that had followed Ethan earlier now idled on a side street, and inside sat two men in dark jackets, one scrolling through encrypted messages while the other lifted a camera with a telephoto lens aimed at Ethan's front door, whispering, "If she's alive, she'll show herself to him eventually," the implications settling between them like a viper coiling on warm stone. Marissa finally boarded a late-night bus heading toward the industrial district, knowing she needed to retrieve something she had hidden years earlier, something she hoped was still where she left it. A flash drive containing evidence strong enough to prove that the pharmaceutical company had ordered her assassination. But the closer she got to the area, the more her anxiety climbed because she had no guarantee that the hiding place hadn't been discovered or that Kyle, or worse, her former pursuers, weren't already waiting. Ethan sat at the edge of Liam's bed watching his son sleep, brushing a hand through his curls, whispering, "I'll always protect you," even though he didn't fully know what he was protecting him from. But the moment carried a strange weight, like a promise made in a storm before the thunder strikes. Suddenly, a faint knock sounded at the front door, 3 slow taps, and Ethan's muscles tensed, his heart hammering as he stood quietly, walking to the door with deliberate steps, peering through the peephole but seeing no one outside. After a long pause, he opened the door slightly and found an envelope on the welcome mat, no address, no writing, only a small embossed symbol on the back. The exact symbol that appeared on the documents the police handed him 4 years ago after Marissa's accident, and Ethan's blood ran cold as he whispered, "Why now?" While far across the city, Marissa stepped off the bus, her boots crunching against gravel as she approached an abandoned storage yard where she had once met Vera in secret, and she slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence, moving quickly between rusted metal containers until she reached the specific one marked with a faded red X, her makeshift vault. She pushed aside a loose panel she remembered hiding years ago and reached inside the hollow space, her fingers brushing against the metal canister she had left behind, and relief washed over her when she felt the flash drive still inside. Until she heard a low voice behind her say, "You really shouldn't have come back here, Marissa," and she spun around to see 2 men stepping out of the shadows, their faces half lit by the dim street lamps, both of them wearing the same jackets as the men in the SUV, both of them carrying weapons half concealed beneath their coats. Marissa's pulse surged as she clutched the flash drive, backing up until her spine hit cold metal, but then a loud crack echoed, a gunshot, one of the men stumbling as a bullet tore into his shoulder, and in moments of chaos she saw a third figure emerge from behind another container, firing with precision, shouting, "Marissa, run!" And her breath caught because she recognized that voice instantly. Vera Castillo was alive. The second pursuer lunged for Marissa and grabbed her wrist, trying to rip the flash drive from her hand, but Vera shot him in the thigh, sending him crashing to the ground with a scream, and Marissa took the chance to sprint toward a gap in the yard's fencing. Vera followed, shouting, "They know you're alive. You need to disappear again." But Marissa stopped abruptly, turned, and said with raw desperation, "I can't disappear, not without making sure my son is safe." And Vera's expression twisted with fear and frustration, replying, "If they know you're alive, they'll go after Ethan and the boy first," words that hit Marissa with the force of a collapsing world. Across town, Ethan finally opened the envelope he found on the doorstep, expecting maybe a bill or a prank, but instead discovering a single photograph inside, grainy, taken from a distance, clearly snapped from a surveillance angle, and the image made his knees buckle. It showed his wife, alive, at the cemetery, half hidden behind a tree yet unmistakable, and Ethan stared at it for several minutes, mind refusing to accept what his eyes were screaming, whispering, "Marissa." With a voice so fragile it almost broke, tears welled up, not of joy but of terror, because the photograph wasn't addressed to him out of kindness, it was a threat, a message from someone watching, someone who wanted him to know she was alive for reasons he didn't understand yet. He grabbed his coat and keys, heading out the door with shaky determination, planning to go straight to the police or maybe even the cemetery to look for clues, but he froze when he heard the crunch of gravel behind him, turning to see Kyle Mercer standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, expression dark, saying, "We need to talk, Ethan," and before Ethan could react or demand answers, Kyle added with chilling calmness, "Because your wife's return isn't the miracle you think it is. It's a warning." Ethan stood frozen on his front porch as Kyle Mercer approached, a sharp chill slicing through the air that had nothing to do with the winter night, and when Kyle said, "Your wife's return is a warning," Ethan felt something inside him snap, a mixture of fear, hope, and anger boiling together as he demanded, "Where is she? What do you know?" But Kyle only tilted his head, glancing past Ethan toward the dark street as though expecting someone else to arrive, someone dangerous, and whispered, "They've moved faster than I expected." At that same moment across the city, Marissa and Vera sprinted through the maze of containers, their breaths sharp and visible in the cold, gunshots echoing behind them as the men who had hunted Marissa for years regrouped, firing blindly into the night, and when they reached the edge of the storage yard, Marissa grabbed Vera's arm, gasping, "We have to get to Ethan, now." But Vera shook her head firmly, almost desperately, saying, "If they see you with him, you'll lead them straight to the boy. You'll endanger them even more." But Marissa's eyes blazed with the fierce, unstoppable determination of a mother who had lost everything once and refused to lose it again, and she whispered, "I won't let them touch my family," before stepping out from the shadows and disappearing into the night, leaving Vera torn between following her and chasing the gunmen who were regrouping behind them. Back at Ethan's home, Kyle finally spoke again, this time with a quiet urgency, telling Ethan that the pharmaceutical group Marissa had exposed, the same group responsible for multiple deaths, had reactivated their operation under a new name and new leadership, a leadership more ruthless, better funded, and far more desperate to silence anyone who knew the truth, especially Marissa, who had the only existing copy of evidence capable of destroying them. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, shaking, whispering, "Are you saying she's alive, and still being hunted?" And Kyle answered, "She never stopped being hunted," before revealing the part that made Ethan stagger. The group had discovered Liam's school, mapped Ethan's daily routes, and even hacked into their home Wi-Fi, all in an attempt to locate Marissa, because they believed she would eventually break her silence to protect her family. Ethan's heart pounded violently as he said, "Then why are you here? To help us, or to deliver us?" And Kyle's jaw tightened as he replied, "To keep you alive." Then he stepped closer and said something that Ethan didn't expect, something that changed everything. "Marissa isn't running anymore. She's coming here tonight." Ethan's pulse thundered so loudly he almost didn't hear the distant crunch of tires rolling to a stop at the end of the street, headlights turning off, doors opening quietly, too quietly, and Kyle moved instantly, grabbing Ethan's arm and pulling him inside as he whispered harshly, "They found you," and Ethan scrambled to lock the door, rushing to Liam's room to lift the sleeping boy into his arms just as a shadow passed by the living room window. Ethan's eyes darted around the house as Kyle positioned himself near the hallway, pulling a concealed pistol from his jacket, and Ethan whispered, "What do we do?" But Kyle only said, "We stall long enough for her to get here," and Ethan's throat tightened because the thought that Marissa was close, rushing toward him, filled him with equal parts hope and terror. Meanwhile Marissa sprinted several blocks away, her lungs burning, heart pounding as she saw the shape of Ethan's neighborhood coming into view. But then she spotted it, the black SUV parked across from Ethan's home, the same men stepping out with weapons drawn, and a primal, raw scream tore through her chest as she pushed herself faster than she ever had in her life. Back inside, Kyle whispered for Ethan to stay low and protect Liam while he positioned himself to take the first hit, but before either man could brace, a loud crash shook the front of the house as the attackers attempted to break the door down, and Liam jolted awake, crying as Ethan whispered, "It's okay, buddy, Daddy's here," even though every cell in his body was screaming in fear. The door gave way on the third hit, splintering open as two masked men stormed inside, Kyle firing the first shot which struck one in the shoulder, sending him crashing into a bookshelf, but the second man lunged forward with terrifying speed, tackling Kyle to the floor as they struggled violently for control of the gun. Ethan dashed back toward the hallway with Liam in his arms, but another figure appeared at the rear window, a third attacker climbing in after smashing the glass, and Ethan had nowhere left to run, no weapon, no time, only instinct, when suddenly a deafening sound cracked through the house and the man by the window collapsed, blood spreading across his sleeve, and Ethan spun around to see her, Marissa, standing in the broken frame, eyes blazing with a fury he had never seen before, weapon steady in her hand, and Ethan nearly collapsed as he whispered, "Marissa." And Marissa's eyes filled with tears as she said, "I'm here," before rushing to him and placing her hand on Liam's cheek, breath breaking as she whispered, "Hi baby, mommy's here," but there was no time for reunion because the two remaining attackers were regrouping, and Kyle shouted from the floor, "Go! Take them and run." As he fought to keep the last gunman pinned, Marissa grabbed Ethan's hand, pulling him and Liam through the kitchen and out the back door, racing into the alley as gunshots followed them, but just when they reached the corner of the block, a black sedan screeched around the corner, blocking their path, and a tall man stepped out, clean-cut, expressionless, the director of the pharmaceutical group himself, a man Marissa had once interviewed on camera without realizing he orchestrated deaths behind the scenes, and he raised a gun at them, saying coldly, "Hand over the drive, Marissa, and maybe your family survives the night." But Marissa stepped in front of Ethan and Liam, refusing to move, refusing to yield, and with a shaking hand she pulled the flash drive from her pocket, holding it up between them like a fragile lifeline, whispering, "This ends tonight." The director smirked coldly and took a step forward, but before he could reach her, a bullet tore into his leg as Vera Castillo emerged from behind a dumpster, shouting, "Federal agent, drop your weapon." And in the chaos that followed, Kyle burst from the house dragging one of the attackers, sirens suddenly rising in the distance as backup units, summoned by Vera, flooded the street. The remaining gunmen were tackled, disarmed, and restrained, and the director was dragged to the ground by two agents who arrived seconds later, all while Ethan held Marissa in his arms, both of them shaking, both refusing to let go. When the chaos finally settled and Liam clung to Marissa with tiny trembling hands, Ethan cupped her face and whispered, "You're alive, you came back," and Marissa sobbed into his chest, whispering, "I never wanted to leave you. I never stopped loving you," and Ethan pressed his forehead to hers, eyes burning as he replied, "Then you're home now. For good." The evidence on Marissa's flash drive destroyed the corrupt pharmaceutical ring, its leaders arrested, files exposed, victims finally vindicated, and within weeks the case became national news, but none of that mattered as much as the quiet moment 2 months later when Ethan, Marissa, and Liam stood together at the cemetery where Marissa's own headstone still stood, and Ethan wrapped an arm around her as she whispered, "I died here once, and now I'm alive again," and Ethan replied, "No, you were never gone. We were always waiting, and as they walked away from the grave hand in hand, the sun breaking through the clouds above them, it felt like the world had finally given them permission to breathe, to heal, to begin again, together, alive, and free.